The observation deck of the Hegemony Research Station hummed with excited chatter as Ambassador Krelix adjusted his ceremonial robes. Through the reinforced transparasteel, Earth hung like a blue-green marble against the void, beautiful and deceptively peaceful. The assembled dignitaries from across the galaxy had come to witness what they believed would be a simple demonstration of superior alien intellect over primitive human psychology. "Esteemed colleagues," Krelix announced, his forearms spread wide in a gesture of welcome, "today we settle the debate that has raged through our academic circles for cycles. Are these humans truly as resilient as the initial contact reports suggest, or have we been deceived by exaggerated tales?" The crowd murmured agreement. Representatives from the Vorthak Empire, the crystal communes of Zephyr, and dozens of other civilizations had gathered for this moment. They had all heard the stories, humans who survived in conditions that would kill most sapient species, humans who fought with a ferocity that defied logical explanation, humans who somehow thrived on a world that the galactic community had classified as a Class Thur Deathworld. Dr. Vex, the station's chief xenobiologist, stepped forward. His reptilian features bore the confident smile of someone about to prove a long-held theory. "The human specimen we've acquired represents what their species considers an average example, a female approximately 23 standard years old from their military caste. No genetic modifications, no cybernetic enhancements, purely baseline human." In the detention block 3 levels below, Maya Chen sat motionless in her cell, studying the energy field that served as her prison door. She had been conscious when the tractor beam caught her reconnaissance shuttle near the outer rim of the solar system. Conscious when they brought her aboard. Conscious through every moment of the past 72 hours as various alien scientists poked, prodded, and tested her like a laboratory specimen. They thought she was unconscious during the procedures. The neural suppressors they used would have rendered any known alien species catatonic. But Maya had remained aware throughout it all. Her grandmother's stories of surviving the Beijing occupation had taught her that sometimes the best weapon was letting your enemy underestimate you. The cell was a cube roughly 3 meters on each side, with walls that shifted between opaque and transparent based on whether her captors wanted to observe her. The gravity was slightly lighter than Earth standard, and the atmosphere was breathable, but carried an odd metallic taste that made her think of old coins and distant storms. Maya had already cataloged 17 different ways she could die in this cell if she chose to. She had also identified 12 potential weapons among the seemingly harmless furniture and memorized the patrol schedule of the guards who passed by every 43 minutes. But she wasn't ready to act yet. She was still learning. On the observation deck, Krelix continued his presentation. Phase 1 of our study involved standard stress responses, physical discomfort, sensory deprivation, nutritional irregularities. The results have been illuminating. A holographic display materialized, showing Maya's vital signs over the past 3 days. Her heart rate remained steady, her stress hormones barely elevated above baseline. The assembled scientists exchanged glances of surprise. "As you can see," Dr. Vex interjected, "the subject shows remarkable stability. However, we believe this may be due to the primitive nature of human neural development. Their brains simply lack the sophistication to fully comprehend their situation." Maya would have laughed if she hadn't been maintaining her facade of cooperative passivity. Through her seemingly vacant stare, she watched the ceiling-mounted sensors tracking her every movement. She had identified at least 7 different monitoring systems, from thermal imaging to electromagnetic field detection. They were being very thorough, which meant they were also very afraid. The first alien to enter her cell had been a spindly creature with too many joints and eyes like black pearls. It had spoken in broken English, asking her questions about human military capabilities, population centers, defensive systems. Maya had given her name, rank, and service number, nothing more. The creature had seemed frustrated by her lack of cooperation, but also strangely pleased, as if her defiance confirmed some hypothesis. The second visitor had been more sophisticated. Humanoid in shape, but with skin that shifted colors like an oil slick, and a voice that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. This one didn't ask questions. Instead, it simply stared at her for long minutes, while instruments she couldn't see took readings from her body and brain. The human shows signs of what their species calls military conditioning, the oil-slick alien had told someone outside the cell. Interesting. Their warrior caste appears to have developed psychological barriers against standard interrogation techniques. We should proceed to Phase 2. Now, as Maya sat in apparent meditation, she was actually running through combat scenarios in her mind. The cell door was energy-based, probably a contained plasma field, judging by the slight electromagnetic disturbance she could feel in her fillings. The guards carried what looked like stun weapons, though she suspected they were calibrated for alien physiology and might not affect her human nervous system the same way. The biggest unknown was the station's layout. She had caught glimpses during her transport from the shuttle bay, long corridors with the slightly curved walls that suggested a rotating habitat, gravity that felt generated rather than natural, and an architectural style that prioritized function over form. The aliens had built this place for research, not comfort. On the observation deck, Ambassador Krelix was warming to his topic. What makes this demonstration particularly significant is the human's background. According to our intelligence, this specimen comes from one of Earth's most militarized regions. If we can break her conditioning, we can break any human. The assembled dignitaries leaned forward with interest. The Vorthak representative, a massive creature that looked like a cross between a bear and a lobster, clicked its mandibles in anticipation. "And if you cannot break her?" Dr. Vex's smile grew wider. "Then we move to increasingly aggressive measures until we find her breaking point. Every species has one. It's simply a matter of proper application of pressure." Maya felt the familiar tingle that meant they were about to begin another session. Her captors had developed a pattern: long periods of isolation, followed by intense bursts of various stimuli designed to test her limits. So far, they had tried extreme temperatures, loud noises, flashing lights, disorienting magnetic fields, and various chemical compounds introduced into her air supply. What they didn't understand was that Maya had been born and raised on Earth, where the background radiation would sterilize most alien species within days, where the atmospheric pressure would crush delicate alien bones, where the very air carried microorganisms that would devastate any immune system not forged in Earth's biological crucible. The humans hadn't conquered their homeworld. They had been forged by it, shaped by millions of years of surviving in conditions that made most other worlds look like paradise resorts. Every challenge her captors presented was pale compared to what her species had already endured and overcome. The cell door shimmered and faded, replaced by empty air. 3 guards entered, their movements cautious despite their superior numbers and equipment. Maya recognized 2 of them from previous sessions, the tall one with the blue-tinted skin and the shorter one whose face was hidden behind a breathing apparatus that suggested Earth's atmosphere would be toxic to it. The 3rd guard was new, bigger than the others, with scales that seemed to absorb light and eyes that glowed with their own inner fire. This one carried itself like a predator, and Maya felt her pulse quicken slightly in anticipation. "Subject exhibits elevated stress response to the presence of Security Chief Thraka," Dr. Vex announced to his audience. "As predicted, the human shows primitive fear reactions to obvious predator species." Maya almost smiled. They were reading her readiness as fear, her focus as stress. These aliens had clearly never encountered a species that had evolved alongside creatures like sharks, tigers, and spiders. To them, Thraka probably looked terrifying. To Maya, he looked like an interesting tactical challenge. "Today we begin Phase 2, the tall blue alien announced in accented English. "You will be presented with scenarios designed to test your species' psychological resilience. Cooperation will result in improved conditions. Resistance will result in escalation." Maya said nothing. She had learned that her captors found her silence more unnerving than any words she might speak. They were a chatty species, constantly communicating through speech, gesture, and what looked like controlled bioluminescence. Her ability to remain perfectly still and quiet for hours at a time seemed to disturb them on a fundamental level. Thraka moved closer, his scaled bulk casting shadows across the cell. Maya could smell him now, ozone and copper, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. When he spoke, his voice was like gravel being crushed under steel. "Your world dies," he said simply. "Your cities burn, your people scream." "How does this make you feel?" Maya met his glowing gaze steadily. "Disappointed that you think so little of human imagination," she replied. "Did you really expect threats about things that haven't happened to break someone who's seen what has?" The reaction from the observation deck was immediate. Surprised exclamations in a dozen different languages filled the air as the assembled dignitaries realized the human had been aware and responsive throughout the entire observation period. Dr. Vex quickly recovered his composure. "Fascinating. The subject has been conscious during periods we believed her to be in a suppressed state. This suggests either natural resistance to our neural dampeners or your neural dampeners are calibrated for the wrong species," Maya interrupted, still looking directly at Thraka. "Just like everything else you've tried so far." The scaled alien leaned closer, his breath hot against her face. "You think your defiance impresses me, human? I have broken warriors from species that consider themselves the pinnacle of martial evolution. I have heard the death songs of the Krill, witnessed the final howls of Vorthak champions. What makes you think a soft creature from a backwater world can withstand what they could not?" Maya finally smiled, and something in that expression made Thraka take an involuntary step backward. "Because," she said quietly, "you're still thinking like a predator. You think fear and pain and intimidation are the only tools that matter, but you've never met a species that evolved as prey." The observation deck fell silent. Even the translation systems seemed to hesitate before rendering her words into the various alien languages. "Prey species learn to endure," Maya continued, her voice steady and calm despite the massive alien looming over her. "We learn to survive things that would kill a predator outright. We learn to hide our pain, to function while injured, to keep thinking clearly when everything is falling apart around us. We learn that sometimes the only way to win is to let the predator think they've already won." Thraka's eyes narrowed, their inner light pulsing faster. "Pretty words. Let us see how pretty they sound when you are screaming them." The session that followed would be analyzed by xenopsychologists for decades afterward. Maya was subjected to sensory bombardment that should have induced immediate neural collapse, gravitational fluctuations that should have liquefied her bones, and atmospheric compositions that should have triggered respiratory failure within minutes. Through it all, she maintained the same calm demeanor she had shown from the beginning. When the pain reached levels that would have killed most species, she breathed through it like a woman in labor. When the gravity increased to the point where movement should have been impossible, she found ways to adapt and function. When the atmosphere turned toxic, she simply held her breath and waited for the test to end. "Impossible," Dr. Vex muttered, staring at the readouts. "These readings suggest physiological responses that exceed known parameters for carbon-based life." Ambassador Krelix was less concerned with scientific impossibilities than with political implications. If these readings were accurate, if humans were truly this resistant to standard pacification techniques, then the hegemony's plans for Earth would need serious reconsideration. In the cell, Maya endured. She had learned endurance from her grandmother, who had survived 3 years in a labor camp. She had learned it from her mother, who had worked 18-hour shifts to keep their family fed. She had learned it from Earth itself, a world that killed anything weak enough to let it. But endurance was only half the lesson. The other half was knowing when to strike. As the session finally ended and the aliens retreated from her cell, Maya noticed something they had missed in their focus on her reactions. Thraka's breathing apparatus had been damaged during one of the gravitational fluctuations. Just a small crack in the faceplate. Barely visible unless you knew what to look for. She filed that information away with all the other details she had been collecting. Guard schedules, equipment vulnerabilities, structural weak points, behavioral patterns. Her captors thought they were studying her, but she had been studying them just as intently. The observation deck was buzzing with conversation as the dignitaries discussed what they had witnessed. Some expressed concern about the implications. Others suggested more aggressive testing protocols. A few recommended terminating the experiment before it revealed any more uncomfortable truths about human capabilities. But Maya wasn't thinking about their debates or their fears. She was thinking about the slight delay she had noticed in the cell door's activation sequence, the way the guards always approached from the same angle, and the fact that Thraka's damaged breathing apparatus meant he would need to return for repairs within the next few hours. She was thinking about the moment when endurance would transform into action. And as she sat in apparent defeat in her cell, Maya Chen began to plan not just her escape, but the complete downfall of everyone who had made the mistake of capturing a woman from Earth and assuming she would break like everything else they had tested before her. The aliens thought they were studying human psychology. What they were actually doing was giving an apex predator from the galaxy's most dangerous world a detailed map of all their weaknesses. They would realize their mistake soon enough. The medical bay of the research station was a sterile maze of gleaming instruments and humming diagnostic equipment. Thraka stood perfectly still as the automated systems repaired his breathing apparatus, his scaled hide reflecting the cool blue light of the medical scanners. The crack in his faceplate had been minor, but exposure to unfiltered station atmosphere could prove fatal to his species. Dr. Vex monitored the repair process while reviewing the data from their latest test session. "The human's resistance patterns are unlike anything in our database," he muttered, manipulating holographic displays with practiced efficiency. Her stress hormone levels actually decreased during some of the more intense phases. "Perhaps she is defective," Thraka suggested, his voice slightly distorted by the medical unit's temporary breathing apparatus. "A mental aberration among her species." "No," Dr. Vex replied, his reptilian features creased with concentration. "The preliminary scans confirm she's well within normal parameters for her species. If anything, she represents an above-average specimen. The implications are troubling." 3 levels below, Maya had already begun the delicate process of mapping her environment through sound. The station's rotating habitat created subtle variations in vibration patterns that revealed structural details to anyone who knew how to listen. She had learned this technique during urban warfare training, where the difference between a load-bearing wall and a partition could mean the difference between successful extraction and catastrophic collapse. The air recycling system operated on a 17-minute cycle, drawing atmosphere from her cell through vents positioned near the ceiling. The gravity generator created a barely perceptible thrumming that suggested it was located somewhere in the station's lower levels. Most importantly, she had identified the power conduits running through the walls. The electromagnetic signatures were distinctive once you learned to recognize them. Her captors had made several critical errors in their assumptions about human physiology and psychology. They believed that isolation would break her spirit, not understanding that humans had spent millennia surviving in environments where solitude was often the difference between life and death. They thought pain would cloud her judgment. not realizing that humans had evolved to function efficiently while injured or distressed. Most importantly, they assumed she would respond to captivity the way their own species would, with despair, anger, or resignation. They didn't understand that humans had been taking prisoners and escaping from captivity for thousands of years, refining the techniques with each generation. Maya had already identified 14 separate surveillance systems monitoring her cell: thermal imaging, electromagnetic field detection, motion sensors, atmospheric analysis, neural activity monitoring, and several others whose exact nature remained unclear. The aliens were thorough, she had to admit, but thoroughness could become a weakness if it created dependencies. She stood and walked to the center of her cell, moving with deliberate casualness. To her observers, it would appear she was simply stretching her muscles after the recent test session. In reality, she was positioning herself at the precise point where the surveillance system's fields overlapped most densely. The trick was to create what intelligence specialists called signal saturation, overwhelming the monitoring equipment with so much data that meaningful analysis became impossible. Maya began a series of exercises that she had learned during her service in Earth's Special Operations Command, movements specifically designed to generate maximum electromagnetic interference while appearing completely innocent. On the observation deck, Ambassador Krelix was reviewing the session recordings with his scientific staff. "How confident are we in these readings?" he asked, his forearms gesturing toward the displays showing Maya's physiological responses. "Very confident," Dr. Vex replied. "We've run multiple verification protocols. The human's pain tolerance is approximately 40% higher than our most optimistic projections. Her stress response mechanisms show adaptations we've never encountered, and her cognitive function actually improved under conditions that should have induced psychological breakdown." The Vorthak representative shifted his massive bulk, mandibles clicking with agitation. "These findings contradict our assessments of human military capability. If their baseline soldiers show this level of resilience, what does that suggest about their elite forces? Or their civilian population?" added the delegate from the crystal communes, her crystalline form resonating with harmonics of concern. "A species that can function normally under Clasthalthine Deathworld conditions might view our standard pacification protocols as minor inconveniences." Ambassador Krelix felt a cold certainty settling into his bones. The hegemony's expansion plans had been based on the assumption that humans, despite their primitive technology, would respond to conventional conquest techniques. But if these test results were accurate, if humans possessed this level of natural resilience, then the entire strategic framework would need revision. In the medical bay, Thraka's breathing apparatus repair was nearly complete. The security chief had been reviewing the human's psychological profile while waiting, and certain details troubled him. Military service records indicated extensive training in what humans called unconventional warfare, techniques designed for operations behind enemy lines, in hostile territory, with minimal resources and support. "Doctor," he said, his voice carrying a new note of urgency, "has anyone analyzed the human's behavior patterns during the observation periods?" Dr. Vex looked up from his data screens. "What do you mean?" "The way she moves, the way she positions herself, the timing of her responses." Thraka's eyes began to glow brighter as understanding dawned. "She's not just enduring our tests, she's studying us." In her cell, Maya had completed her electromagnetic interference routine and was now conducting what appeared to be simple meditation. Her breathing was deep and steady, her posture relaxed, her expression peaceful. The surveillance systems registered decreased activity across all monitored parameters. What they couldn't detect was the mental mapping exercise she was performing, constructing a three-dimensional model of the station's layout based on acoustic resonance, electromagnetic field variations, and gravitational anomalies. She had identified the main power distribution hub, the central command center, and most importantly, the shuttle bay where her reconnaissance craft was likely being held. The station operated on a standard day-night cycle, probably to accommodate the circadian rhythms of the primary species that staffed it. During the night period, the lighting dimmed and the background activity levels decreased. Maya had noticed that guard patrols were reduced during these hours, though surveillance monitoring remained constant. She had also observed that the guards carried their weapons on the left side of their utility harnesses, suggesting they were predominantly right-handed. Their movement patterns indicated training in formation tactics rather than individual combat, which made sense for a species that had probably achieved dominance through technological superiority rather than physical prowess. Most tellingly, none of them showed signs of the hypervigilance that came with extensive combat experience. They were researchers and technicians playing at being soldiers, which meant they would make predictable mistakes under pressure. The medical bay's automated systems completed their work with a series of soft chimes. Thraka removed the temporary breathing apparatus and tested his repaired equipment, satisfied with the seal and gas mixture. But his earlier realization continued to gnaw at him. "Doctor, I need to review all surveillance recordings from the human cell," he said, already moving toward the exit. "I believe we may have misinterpreted her behavior." Dr. Vex followed, his scaled feet clicking against the polished deck plates. "Misinterpreted how?" "We've been assuming she's a passive subject," Thraka explained as they walked through the station's curved corridors. "But what if she's an active intelligence gatherer? What if everything she's done has been designed to learn about us while revealing as little as possible about herself?" The possibility sent ripples of alarm through the research team. If the human had been conducting counter-surveillance operations, if she had been mapping their capabilities and vulnerabilities while appearing to submit to testing, then the security implications were staggering. In the central command center, technicians quickly assembled the requested surveillance data. Hours of recordings were analyzed through advanced pattern recognition algorithms, searching for subtle indicators that might have been missed during real-time observation. What they found confirmed Thraka's worst fears. The human's eye movement patterns showed systematic examination of every visible surface in her cell. Her seemingly random position changes had actually provided her with viewing angles of corridor layouts beyond her detention area. Her breathing exercises had been timed to coincide with guard shift changes, suggesting she was monitoring personnel schedules. "She's been conducting reconnaissance," Dr. Vex breathed, his voice hollow with realization, "for the entire duration of her captivity." Ambassador Krelix arrived at the command center just as the analysis reached its conclusion. "What's the security assessment?" he demanded. Thraka's scaled features were grim. "The human has likely acquired detailed intelligence about our station layout, personnel routines, equipment capabilities, and defensive systems. From a tactical standpoint, she now knows more about this facility than most of our staff." "But she's still contained," the ambassador pointed out. "The energy field is impenetrable, the surveillance is constant, and she has no weapons or allies." "Sir," interrupted one of the technicians, pointing at the live feed from Maya's cell, "you need to see this." On the screen, Maya was performing what appeared to be simple stretching exercises, but now that they knew what to look for, the pattern became clear. She was testing the range of motion available to her, cataloging the precise dimensions of her confinement, and measuring the response characteristics of the energy field that served as her door. "She's preparing for something," Thraka realized. "The question is what and when." The answer came sooner than any of them expected. Maya had been tracking time not by the station's artificial day-night cycle, but by the biological rhythms of her guards. Different species had different metabolic patterns, and she had identified a brief window every rotation when the optimal combination of factors aligned: minimal surveillance activity, predictable guard positioning, and what appeared to be a slight power fluctuation in the detention block's primary systems. The next window would occur in approximately 37 minutes. She stood and walked to the energy field that served as her door, placing her palm against the shimmering barrier. To her observers, it would appear she was testing the field's strength out of simple curiosity. In reality, she was confirming her analysis of its electromagnetic frequency and power cycling. The field operated on a rotating harmonic pattern, probably to prevent exactly the kind of exploitation she was planning. But rotation meant variance, and variance meant vulnerability. During the brief moment when the frequency shifted from one harmonic to the next, there would be a gap, microseconds of instability that could be exploited with precise timing and the right kind of interference. Maya had learned about electromagnetic pulse techniques during her military service. Most of the training had focused on using specialized equipment to disrupt enemy electronics, but the underlying principles could be adapted for other applications. The human body, when properly prepared, could generate its own electromagnetic field of limited but focused intensity. The technique was dangerous, requiring precise control of muscle contractions and electrical impulses that could cause cardiac arrest or neural damage if performed incorrectly. But Maya had been trained by instructors who believed that any technique worth learning was worth practicing until it could be performed under the worst possible conditions. She began preparing her cardiovascular system for what she privately thought of as controlled electrocution, breathing exercises to maximize oxygen saturation, muscle tension patterns to redirect nerve impulses, and mental conditioning to maintain consciousness through what would essentially be a self-induced seizure. In the command center, the technicians monitoring her vital signs noticed irregularities in her biorhythms. "Heart rate is increasing," one reported. "Neural activity showing unusual patterns." Dr. Vex frowned at the readings. "Could be preparing for another endurance trial. Her species seems to have conscious control over autonomic functions that should be involuntary." "Or," Thraka said quietly, "she's preparing to do something we haven't anticipated." The security chief had fought creatures from across the galaxy, had studied warfare from a dozen different perspectives, and had developed an instinct for recognizing when an opponent was about to make their move. Every indicator he had learned to trust was screaming warnings at him now. "Increase security protocols," he ordered. "Full alert status. I want every guard at ready stations." But Maya wasn't waiting for them to react to her preparations. She had already moved to the second phase of her plan, one that required perfect timing and absolute commitment. The electromagnetic pulse technique would disable the energy field for perhaps 3 seconds before backup systems reactivated it. 3 seconds to move from her cell to a position where she could engage the guards before they realized what had happened. 3 seconds to transform from captive to combatant. She positioned herself at the optimal angle, calculated the precise timing based on the power fluctuation cycle she had observed, and began the controlled manipulation of her own nervous system that would turn her body into a living electromagnetic weapon. On the observation deck, Ambassador Krelix watched the countdown timer that marked the beginning of the next scheduled test session. In 17 minutes, they would attempt a new phase of psychological examination designed to probe the limits of human emotional resilience. He had no way of knowing that in 17 minutes, Maya Chen would no longer be their prisoner. The readings on her monitoring equipment spiked as she prepared to do something that no other species in the galaxy would have considered possible, using the bioelectric field generated by her own nervous system to overload an energy containment system designed to hold creatures far stronger than any baseline human. But Maya wasn't just any baseline human. She was a woman from Earth, trained by the most dangerous military in a galaxy that had never learned to be afraid of predators who had started as prey. And she was done being studied. The power fluctuation occurred exactly when Maya had predicted it would. For a microsecond, the energy field destabilized as the station's electrical systems shifted from primary to secondary power routing. In that brief window, Maya released the bioelectric charge she had been building in her nervous system. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The containment field collapsed with a sound like breaking glass, sparks cascading from the control mechanisms as the sudden electromagnetic surge overloaded circuits that had never been designed to handle that specific frequency of interference. Maya was already in motion before the sparks stopped falling. She had positioned herself for maximum momentum, and her first step carried her through the doorway and into the corridor beyond. The nearest guard was still turning toward the sound when her shoulder connected with his solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs and sending him crashing into the opposite wall. The second guard managed to draw his weapon before Maya's elbow found the cluster of nerve endings just below his jaw. The stunning device clattered to the deck as its wielder collapsed, his blue-tinged skin already darkening with unconsciousness. Thraka had been approaching the detention block when the alarms began screaming throughout the station. Emergency lighting bathed the corridors in blood-red illumination as automated systems announced a containment breach in multiple alien languages. "All security teams to Detention Block 7, he snarled into his communication unit, his scaled hide reflecting the crimson warnings like burnished armor. "The human has escaped containment." But Maya was already 3 levels away from the detention block, moving through maintenance conduits that the station's architects had never intended for rapid transit. Her military training had taught her that the quickest route between 2 points was rarely a straight line, especially when that line would be monitored and defended. The maintenance shafts were a maze of power conduits, atmospheric recycling ducts, and data transmission lines. Maya navigated them with the confidence of someone who had spent years learning to move through similar environments on Earth, where industrial complexes and military installations shared the same basic engineering principles regardless of who built them. Behind her, the station's security forces were responding with the kind of coordinated efficiency that spoke to good training and regular drills. Unfortunately for them, their drills had been designed around containing alien prisoners who would panic and flee randomly when freed. They had never planned for an escapee who had spent days mapping their facility and studying their response protocols. Maya reached her first objective, the primary power distribution hub, without encountering resistance. The chamber was exactly where she had calculated it would be, a spherical room lined with crystalline energy cells that pulsed with the rhythm of the station's heartbeat. More importantly, it was temporarily unguarded as security forces focused their search on more obvious escape routes. The power systems were elegant in their alien sophistication, but they followed the same basic principles as any electrical grid. Maya identified the primary distribution nodes and began the careful work of introducing controlled failures that would cascade through the network in a specific sequence. She wasn't trying to destroy the station. That would be wasteful and potentially dangerous to innocent researchers. Instead, she was creating a carefully orchestrated pattern of power fluctuations that would disable security systems while leaving life support and navigation intact. The first blackout hit Deck 5 just as Thraka's search teams reached the detention block. Emergency lighting flickered and died, plunging entire sections of the facility into darkness. Backup systems engaged automatically, but Maya had anticipated that response and introduced delays that would keep the station operating in a state of controlled chaos. "She's not fleeing," Thraka realized as reports flooded in from across the station. "She's attacking our infrastructure." Dr. Vex joined him in the Central Command Center, where technicians struggled to coordinate response efforts with malfunctioning communication systems. "How is this possible?" the scientist demanded. "She's one individual with no weapons, no allies, no technical support." "She has the greatest weapon any soldier can possess," Thraka replied grimly. "Complete understanding of her enemy's weaknesses." On the observation deck, Ambassador Krelix watched the chaos spreading through his research station with growing horror. The carefully assembled delegation of galactic dignitaries was witnessing not a demonstration of human inferiority, but a terrifying display of human capabilities under pressure. "This is what one human can do," the Vorthak representative observed, his massive mandibles clicking with what might have been respect or fear. "Imagine what their military could accomplish if they decided we were a threat." Maya had already moved to her second objective, the communication array that linked the station to the rest of the galaxy. The transmitter complex was located in the station's upper levels, protected by redundant security systems that were now operating at reduced efficiency thanks to her sabotage of the power grid. 2 guards stood at the entrance to the communications center, their weapons drawn and their posture indicating high alert status. Maya studied them from the shadows of an intersecting corridor, calculating angles and distances with the precision of someone who had learned that miscalculation in combat was usually fatal. The guards were positioned defensively, covering each other's blind spots and maintaining clear fields of fire down the main approach route. Good tactics, but they assumed an attack would come from the expected direction. Maya had learned long ago that the best way to defeat superior firepower was to make it irrelevant through superior positioning. The maintenance shaft above their position provided access to the corridor ceiling, where a junction in the atmospheric recycling system created a narrow space just large enough for human passage. Maya crawled through the cramped opening, moving with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to operating in confined spaces. She positioned herself directly above the guards and began the patient work of loosening a section of ceiling panel. The trick was to create a failure that would appear accidental while providing her with an entry point that bypassed their defensive perimeter entirely. The panel gave way with a grinding creak that sent both guards spinning toward the sound. Maya dropped through the opening in perfect silence, landing between them before either could react to the new threat. Her hands moved with clinical precision, pressure point strikes that induced instant unconsciousness without causing permanent damage. The communications center's main console was a bewildering array of crystalline interfaces and holographic displays, but Maya had studied enough alien technology during her military service to recognize the basic functionality. She began the process of introducing subtle corruptions into the outgoing data streams, not enough to trigger automatic error correction, but sufficient to ensure that any reports about the incident would be garbled and unreliable. Thraka reached the communications center just in time to see Maya completing her work at the main console. She turned to face him with the calm confidence of someone who had achieved every objective they had set for themselves. "Human," he growled, his scaled bulk filling the doorway. "Your escape ends here." Maya studied him with the same analytical attention she had applied to everything else on the station. Thraka was larger and stronger than she was, armed with weapons designed to incapacitate most known species, and backed by the authority of a galactic civilization that viewed humans as primitive curiosities. "No," she said quietly, "it doesn't." The fight that followed would be analyzed by military strategists across the galaxy for generations afterward. Thraka possessed every advantage except the most important one. He had never learned to fight something that refused to be intimidated. Maya moved like water around his attacks, using his superior reach and strength against him by staying inside his guard where his weapons were less effective. When he tried to grapple her, she used joint manipulation techniques that turned his own momentum into leverage for throws and submissions. When he relied on his natural armor, she targeted the gaps and weak points that every species possessed. But the defining moment came when Thraka, frustrated by her elusiveness, made the mistake of trying to intimidate her through raw physical presence. He reared to his full height, spread his arms wide, and let out a roar designed to trigger primal fear responses in prey species. Maya stepped forward instead of backward, Her hand shot out and closed around his throat, not to crush or strangle, but to grip the vulnerable point where his breathing apparatus connected to his respiratory system. Thraka's eyes widened as he realized that she had identified and targeted the one part of his anatomy that could kill him instantly if damaged. "I grew up on a world where everything wants to kill you," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "Where the air itself is toxic to most species, where the gravity would crush your bones, where the simplest organisms carry diseases that would devastate your immune system. You think size and strength make you dangerous? I was born dangerous." Thraka tried to pull away, but Maya had positioned herself with perfect leverage. Any movement he made would only increase the pressure on his breathing apparatus. For the first time in his career as a security chief, he found himself completely at the mercy of someone half his size. "The difference between predator and prey," Maya continued, "isn't size or weapons or armor. It's understanding that sometimes the only way to survive is to be more willing to die than your opponent is to kill you." She increased the pressure slightly, not enough to cause permanent damage, but sufficient to make her point. Thraka's breathing became labored as his damaged apparatus struggled to function. "But I don't want to kill you," Maya said, releasing her grip and stepping back. "I want you to remember this moment. I want you to remember what one human can do when you try to treat us like laboratory animals." Thraka collapsed to his knees, gasping for breath as his respiratory system fought to recover from the near failure of his breathing apparatus. Around them, the sounds of approaching security teams echoed through the corridors as the station's remaining forces converged on their position. Maya walked to the center of the communication chamber and sat down cross-legged on the deck, her hands visible and empty. She had accomplished everything she had set out to do. The station's security had been demonstrated to be inadequate against human infiltration techniques. The communication systems had been compromised, ensuring that accurate reports of the incident would be delayed or corrupted. Most importantly, she had provided an object lesson in exactly why underestimating humans was a fatal mistake. When the security teams arrived, they found their chief struggling to breathe and the escaped human sitting peacefully in the middle of the room like a meditation student waiting for instruction. "I surrender," Maya announced calmly, "but I want to speak to Ambassador Krelix. I believe he and I have things to discuss." The prisoner exchange took place 6 hours later. Maya's reconnaissance shuttle was returned to her in perfect condition, its fuel cells topped off, and its navigation systems updated with current stellar cartography data. In return, she provided a detailed briefing on human military capabilities, defensive strategies, and the likely response of Earth's government to any aggressive action by the hegemony. Ambassador Krelix listened to her presentation with the focused attention of someone whose entire worldview was being reconstructed in real time. The implications of what she had demonstrated went far beyond military considerations. If humans possessed this level of natural resilience and adaptability, they represented not just a potential threat, but a potential asset that could revolutionize galactic civilization. "What does Earth want?" he asked finally. Maya smiled, and for the first time since her capture, it was a genuine expression of warmth rather than tactical calculation. "What we've always wanted. To be left alone to figure things out for ourselves. We don't want to conquer anyone or be conquered by anyone. We just want the chance to grow and learn and become whatever we're meant to become. And if we can't offer that, then you'll discover what happens when you threaten a species that evolved on a world where everything is trying to kill you," Maya replied. "We're very good at survival, Ambassador. It's what we do best." The shuttle bay doors opened to reveal the starfield beyond, with Earth's sun visible as a bright point of light in the distance. Maya walked toward her ship with the steady pace of someone going home after a long and difficult assignment. Behind her, The research station's crew watched in silence as the human who had single-handedly dismantled their security systems and challenged their fundamental assumptions about alien psychology prepared to return to her Deathworld home. Dr. Vex approached Ambassador Krelix as Maya's shuttle disappeared into the void. "What do we tell the Hegemony Council?" Krelix considered the question, while staring at the distant sun that had forged a species capable of turning captivity into victory through nothing more than patience, intelligence, and an absolute refusal to accept defeat. "We tell them the truth," he said finally. "Earth is not ready for conquest. And after what we've seen today, I'm not certain we ever want it to be." In her shuttle, Maya composed her after-action report while the autopilot guided her home through the familiar constellations. The report would be classified at levels that ensured it would be read only by people who needed to know that humanity had just announced its presence to the galaxy in the most effective way possible, not through speeches or treaties or demonstrations of technology, but through the simple act of proving that humans could not be broken, could not be cowed, and could not be dismissed as irrelevant to the larger universe. The galaxy had wanted to study human psychology. What they had learned was that some species were too dangerous to study, too resilient to break, and too determined to survive to be safely ignored. Earth hung in the view screen ahead, blue and white and beautiful, a death world that had forged its children in crucibles of adversity that made them capable of enduring anything the universe could devise. Maya smiled as she entered the final approach pattern toward home, already composing the message she would send to military command. "Contact established. Humans officially scary. Recommend we work on being even scarier." Behind her, the alien research station continued its rotation among the stars, its crew forever changed by their encounter with a species that had turned a simple abduction into a masterclass in why predators should be very careful about what they choose to hunt. And throughout the galaxy, word began to spread through unofficial channels that there was a new species worthy of respect, caution, and perhaps most importantly, distance. A species from a world where survival was an art form, and the students had become the masters of their chosen discipline. The Deathworld girl had endured their torment, broken their security chief, and walked away with her dignity intact. In doing so, she had announced to the universe that humanity was ready to take its place among the stars, not as subjects or specimens, but as equals who would define their own destiny.